You're listening to
Sound.
Insightful.
Bible teaching.
For a meaningful
For a meaningful Christian walk.
So I've got 3 or 4 questions tonight. By the way, welcome to Higher Ground. What's the date today? 16th of August, 2023. And tonight we're going to talk about taking Christ as our living for His magnification. So, we just sang this song. I got a question. Who has Christ living in them? Raise your hand. Amen. Okay. Second question. Does anybody know you have Christ living in you? I'm not saying you know. I'm talking about someone else knowing. So I say I've got Christ living in me. Does anybody know that? And how do they know that? I could tell them, I have Christ living in me. And they can say, oh, okay, that's nice. How do I know that? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Like everything in the Christian realm, we can do things in an outward way. We can try to do things by the way of imitation. You cannot imitate Christ's living. You can try, but you're going to fail. You might be able to imitate my living, because I'm just a fallen human being like everyone else. But you can't imitate Christ. It's like, what would Jesus do? That's a nice question. It doesn't matter what Jesus would do if you can't do it. But I'm going to tell you some stories tonight. These are real life stories. So there's a family that I know, and I've only known them as believers. I didn't know them before they got saved. But what they tell me is the mom had just a ferocious temper. And she would lose her temper and just, apparently, she's just this little, but it was like really fearsome. And she had a couple, boys, and they got to be, middle school, teenagers. And then one day their mom got saved. I think her brother preached the gospel, something like that. And she said, I'm, a Christian now, I got saved. And they're like, yeah, okay, big deal. But then they watched her. And she stopped losing her temper. Now this is, dispositional. Do you ever lose your temper? Anyone ever lose their temper? Yeah. Do you like to do that? Do you wish you wouldn't do that? Yeah. So try to stop. Not easy. Just don't lose your temper anymore. That's what Jesus would do, right? Well, anyway, she had enough grace that maybe she still lost it once in a while, but it was nothing like before. So eventually, at least one of her sons became a believer. But what convinced him that God was real was a change he saw in his mom. And it wasn't her saying, now I've been told that Jesus Christ is living in me. And I just want to tell you that fact. Then I'm going to lose my temper. My living hasn't changed. But I'm telling you God is real and He's living in me. It's just like, you can say whatever you want, but what does your living say? So what is it, this title, I think we can understand every word in it, but what does it really mean? Taking Christ as our living. So we've seen Christ as our life. Last week we saw the matter of taking Christ as our person. These things, again, we can understand the words, really getting into the experience of it, not that easy. But taking Christ as our living, when people see you, what do they see? If I see Isaac, doesn't Isaac look like just a normal guy? No, change that. Anyway, he looks like just anyone, right? But if I'm around him 24/7, what am I going to see?
Eating a lot.
Yeah, he'll eat a lot. But is he going to, what am I going to see? Will I see Christ or will I just see Isaac? Maybe a good boy, well behaved. Or am I going to see Christ? So, magnifying Christ, this is to make Christ larger. Now, Christ already, on the earth, he was a finite man. He was limited by time, space, because he became a man. As God, he's infinite. He's unlimited. But, it's a question of value. People in the world who are not believers, they not only do they not believe, Christ has no value. But something has value, then people start going for it. So let's invent a game. Okay? Games are good. So I'm going to invent this game, and I'm going to have a ball, and I'm going to throw it through a hoop. Is that worth anything? I mean, you think about it. It's a ball, and I throw it through a hoop. What's the value? Yeah, 2 points. It can be fun, but I know a brother. He's an investor, and so people come to him, and they want to start a business, or get some money for their business to get going, and so he has to judge. This is my money. I'm going to invest. I mean, it's his own money, so I'm not going to waste it on something that's not going to produce something. I'm going to take one step away from that. He's a very, very, very good brother. And he's got a lot of money. But like he said, it's just adding zeros. Now we see it's like 1,000. If I add 3 zeros to that, that's 1,000,000. To him, it's just 3 zeros. So the money itself doesn't. But anyway, he invests the money, then he gives almost all of it away. But anyway, one day, someone came with a pitch. They were going to start this little business up in Seattle selling coffee. He said, I'm not going to invest my money in some place. This is not ever going to be big. That was Starbucks. So you could say he missed the boat on that one. To him though, it's like, coffee had no value. So if I got this game, I'm going to throw a ball through a hoop. And I came to you all and I said, why don't you invest some money in this to develop it or something? He'd just say, this is so stupid. It's throwing a ball through a hoop. It's like a kid's game. You have fun with it. You're not going to make money on it. Well, then we add value to it. Let's make it a team, right? And let's get uniforms. Let's get sponsors. And we'll get a professional league. And we'll get TV contracts. And let's get it to be an Olympic sport. You're representing your nation. Then suddenly this ridiculous idea of throwing a ball through a hoop has a lot of value. But when you get down to it, it's still throwing a ball through a hoop. But we've added all kinds of value to it. So we do things like that in the world all the time. Things that really don't have much value. I mean, they're fun. I mean, I'm talking about basketball, but you could apply it to so many other things. There's nothing wrong with it. But we've made it this big thing. And yet, in the world's eyes, how much do they esteem Christ? I mean, throwing a ball through a hoop to many people is much, much bigger than Christ. Because they don't see Christ. And they don't see Christ lived out. A lot of times what they see is hypocrisy. Right? You're a Christian, but look at your living. And we can look at our own living, we feel bad. Don't go there. But what we're talking about is magnifying Christ. So I'd like maybe someone, we could just take turns. I want to read all of these verses. This is from Philippians chapter 1. Philippians is a book on the enjoyment and the experience of Christ. So we can just start with Zach, this Zach. Do you want to do two? Okay, we'll start with this Zach, then we'll go to Zach, and then we'll go to ordinary young man Isaac, and just kind of go around. Yeah. Okay.
Philippians 1:17. But the others announced Christ out of selfish ambition, not purely, thinking to raise up affliction in my bonds.
What then? Only that in every way, pretense or untruthfulness, Christ is announced. In this I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice.
Amen. For I know that for me this will turn out to salvation, through your petition and the bountiful supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ.
According to my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing I will be put to shame, but with all boldness, as always, even now, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether through life or through death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain.
Can you do that again?
For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain.
Amen.
A little better. Go ahead.
If I am to live in the flesh, if this is to me is true for my work, then I do not know what I will choose.
Anyone?
For I am constrained between the two, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for this is far better.
But to remain in the flesh is more necessary for your sake.
And being of this, I know that I will remain unto you all for your progress and joy of the faith.
That your boast may abound in Christ Jesus in me, my coming again. Amen.
So, Paul wrote this epistle to the Philippians while he was in prison. And he was imprisoned in a not pleasant environment. I think our prisons in this country, probably they're a lot more pleasant than what Paul had. And he just said some very profound things. He said, this will turn out to me to salvation. Now, Paul was already a saved person. So the salvation here he's talking about is not the salvation from eternal perdition. But it's actually, the salvation is that he would live and magnify Christ. And that in nothing he'd be put to shame. Now, he's there. The reason he's in prison is because of the testimony of Jesus. And at that time, Christians were being persecuted. And of course, he was one of the leading ones. So he's being imprisoned because he's a Christian. Now, what if he would be in prison and he would say, you know, this really, I just can't take it. Hey, jailer, I just want to let you know I'm not a Christian anymore. He would still be a Christian, because once you're saved, you're always saved. But he'd be put to shame. This would be a big shame to him. Or if he'd be complaining. And he had plenty to complain about. But he wanted to, with all boldness as always, even now Christ will be magnified in my body. So everyone's watching him. Maybe they're not watching him 24/7. But it's like, hey, there's that guy. He's a believer in some kind of strange God. he's just not like anybody else. We got him chained up. He's not complaining. You know, he wrote this to the Philippians. You know how the church in Philippi started? Read Acts chapter 16. Paul had they were on their ministry journeys, and he was with Silas, and he had a vision at night, and there was a Macedonian man. I don't know how he knew he was Macedonian, but maybe his language. And he said, come help us. And they'd not been to Macedonia before, apparently. So they went to Philippi, which was one of the leading cities, and they met a few people. They met someone named Lydia. And while they were there, there's this young woman who is possessed by an evil spirit. But because of this possession, apparently she could do some kind of miraculous things, divining and stuff. And so she was being used by some people to make money. Well, she's following the brothers around and saying, hey, look at these guys, they're servants of the Most High God, which to me doesn't sound like that bad, but it's probably pretty annoying. It's like, would you just go home, So Paul, it's like, oh, I've had enough. Okay, evil spirit, get out. And he casts the evil spirit out, and this young woman who had these kind of miraculous abilities became a young woman. And the people who were with her, it's like, we ain't making no more money on her. So they brought Paul and Silas before the magistrates, and they said these guys are causing problems. And so the magistrates, apparently trials or investigation wasn't very good in those days. They took them, they beat them with rods. It's a pretty bad beating. Then they threw them in prison, and they put them in stocks. After having been beaten, now they're in stocks, which is very uncomfortable. So I'm there with Silas. What are we going to do, Silas? No, that's not what you would say. No, the first thing I would say is, Silas, why did God put us in here? And you would say, man, how can we get out? What do we have to do? And let's curse God. Or, something, right? Or at least let's complain. Wouldn't you? I mean, we can all be heroes in our mind, right? I would never do that. Come on. Well, Paul and Silas didn't do that. It said around midnight, while they were praying, they began to sing hymns of praise. Just think about that. Now, if I said, okay, you two, you're beaten and chained up, now you need to sing hymns of praise. Could you do that? Actually, you could. But you need to be one who's really enjoying the Spirit. So in that suffering, then what happened? There was an earthquake. And the jailer thought, all the prisoners are going to be set free, and I'm going to get blamed for it. So I'll just kill myself now, save the time. And Paul says, hey, it's okay, we're all here. Don't do yourself any harm. And the jailer comes and he says, what must I do to be saved? So this insignificant Christ that was worshipped by Paul suddenly became big. And he was magnified through their living. In that hard circumstance, Christ was being magnified and expressed so that these ones could see it. If they were complaining and moaning and groaning and blaming God, and the other prisoners could hear their prayers, they're saying, God, why did you leave us here? Don't you know we serve you? Come on, set us free. Then in the morning when they got set free, they'd say, oh, yeah, actually, we're Christians, we believe in God. The prisoners would go, yeah, right, This was the start of the church in Philippi. So when he talks about these things to the Philippians, they might really understand. So here I am back in prison. I haven't done anything wrong other than being a follower of Christ. But my earnest expectation and hope that in nothing in nothing I'll be put to shame. And the being put to shame here is not living and magnifying Christ. Then he says, for to me to live is Christ. This is verse 21. This is a big, big verse in the Bible. It's a short verse. But for me to live is Christ. This is Paul's experience. This is his expectation. And this all comes through the bountiful supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. There is the Spirit, and this is not just the Spirit of God, not just the Spirit of Christ, not just the Spirit of Jesus, it's the Spirit of Jesus Christ. The name is very significant. Because when you say Jesus, that denotes his human living and his humanity. Christ denotes his divinity. You don't see this term, I don't think, anywhere else, the Spirit of Jesus Christ. So this is everything that Christ is, everything that Christ has gone through is in the Spirit available to Paul and to all of us. I mean, Christ suffered unrighteously and he suffered terribly. But everything he went through, even he's a high priest for us to take care of our needs. He can sympathize with all our weaknesses, but he's there to supply us. So when those hard times come, what are you going to do? You can complain, you can hide, or you can take the grace that is available and live Christ. And then Christ becomes enlarged. Christ is magnified so that we see this ordinary guy in this really hard situation. It's why is he happy? Why is he singing? Why is he rejoicing in this terrible suffering? It's because he's enjoying the Lord. He's enjoying the supply. You know, a lot of people throughout the ages have been martyred, put to death. And some are martyred, maybe not put to death, but physically they suffer. Even psychologically, you can be martyred. But I know a sister. I met her, I don't know, it's a long time ago now, probably 30 years. She's Chinese, she's from China. Very dear sister, genuine believer, loves the Lord, but she didn't grow up that way. She grew up, I think, probably just kind of typical atheist, not believing in Jesus, maybe not opposing Jesus, but she had a friend, and her friend was Christian, and her friend's family, they were Christians, and they suffered a lot of persecution. You know, the Chinese government, communist government, is very anti-God. And they have imprisoned many, many, many Christians. They put to death many, many Christians. So her friend and her family were being persecuted. She could not understand it. What she couldn't understand is, like, you got your whole life ahead. Why are you wasting it on believing in this person who I don't know? Some people tell me he never existed. Why would you do that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But this is where it's really good. She was curious, though. It's like, well, who is Jesus? And she'd never been taught about Jesus, brought up. She went to the library in the city in China. And they actually had a Bible there. I don't know why they didn't take all the Bibles away. But she found a Bible. And she started reading about Jesus. And Jesus became real to her, and she got saved. Because her friend was living Christ. The insignificant Jesus, in the world's eyes, became very big to her. And I'll tell you another story. This is back during the time, Roman Empire, depending who the emperor was, it wasn't a constant persecution. Even some of them accepted Christianity to some degree. But some were just out to stamp it out. So there were periods where if you were a believer, you were in good chance you might get put to death. So there was this 10 or 12, believers, and they were there with the Roman soldiers, and they marched them out onto a frozen lake, so it's winter. Back in those days, I guess, wherever they were, the lakes froze. It'd be like going out in Minnesota. And they stripped them naked, and they put them out in this lake, and you're going to die. Not quickly. You're going to freeze to death. Meanwhile, the soldiers, they didn't just abandon them. They went to the shore and they made a fire, and then they proceeded to mock them while they're freezing to death. And they'd say, why don't you just come get warm by the fire? Would you be tempted to do that? Yeah, I would too. I mean, just like, and they say, it's like, you're going to die. What's going to happen to your family? Don't you care about your family? You're going to die. Well, eventually 2 of them weakened, and they came to the shore. That's the sad part. The good part is 2 of the soldiers got up and said, we're going to take their place. So they were probably already believers. I don't think they probably got saved at that moment. But they might have been hidden believers. So Christ was not being lived out through them. Christ was in them, but they could hide it. I don't know if they got saved then or if they're already believers, but the point is, and that was a choice. Nobody knew. Maybe right at that moment they turned to believe in the Lord, and they went, I'm glad nobody knows, because I'd be out there freezing to death. But they made that choice. So Christ became great. The other soldiers, they had to be impressed by that. It's like, wait a minute. You guys voluntarily are going to go, put yourselves to death. For who? This insignificant Galilean. He's God. So they were magnifying Christ. They were living Christ. This had effect on others. This is what we need to do. But you got to remember the key. You don't do this by your own effort. It's like you have Christ in you. You just got to turn him on. You've got to know how to access the grace that's available to you, the bountiful supply that's available to you. Now, I don't think any of us are going to jail tonight. I hope. Hopefully never. Or are going to be suffering some type of really unrighteous persecution. But you will suffer some persecution. If you're a believer, you should suffer some persecution. It might be from your friends. You're a believer now. And I'm giving my life to Christ, which means some of the things I used to do, I'm not going to do anymore. And they'll say, oh, come on, let's go do whatever. And you'll just realize the life in me is not doing that. And it's not pretending, and it's not trying. It's just like, at one point in my life, I was really not a believer. I got saved, and I went back to my hometown at some point. And that was a small town, so everybody knows everyone. And my mother said, she ran into one of my old friends, and they said, oh, they're getting together at someone's house that night. They're having a party. And she said, you should go. It's like, and they'd like to see you. So I got in my car, or my parents' car, anyway. And to drive there takes 3 minutes or something. Isaac was just in my old hometown. Yeah.
Are you driving?
Yeah. Because I don't want to walk. And I drove around and around and around and around, until finally, because I just just something in me did not want to do that. And finally I just said, this is stupid. I can go to that party and I cannot partake of anything. I can just go see my old friends. And I'm just wasting gas driving around and around. So I drove there, parked the car. I got up and I got to the front door, and I got to the doorbell, and my finger got that close to the doorbell, I could not ring that doorbell. So I turned around, got in my car. Nobody knew that. I didn't come in and say, hey, everybody, I'm a Christian now. I can't do what you're doing. I just want to let you know. Bye. The only person that knew was my mother, because I came home. She said, I thought you went to the party. I said, no, didn't. That was the extent of it. We may not understand. Others may not understand. But there's something of Christ's expression. And I wasn't doing that just because, I don't think I should do that. There was something in me. If we let Christ live in us, and then we live according to that, there's a real supply to take care of us in all of these things. I've got like 1 minute. Paul, at this point, he was like, I might be put to death. And he said, actually, it'd be better to be dead. Because then I'll be even closer with Christ. He had Christ with him already. But, there's a couple degrees of separation. And I can really be with Christ. And that'd be better. But for your sakes, it's not. So, one or the other, they're both good. Being with Christ is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. So, if we are enjoying Christ, living Christ, magnifying Christ, we become a channel of supply to others. So this isn't all about us. Actually, none of the Christian life is all about us. So do you want to be a channel of supply? Do you want to be one who is supplying others, helping others enjoy Christ, not by, twisting their arm? Would you like to be one that you come in and you say good morning, and people are just supplied with Christ? Just your speaking, your being is saturated with Christ. And they just like to be with you. I mean, Jesus himself as a human being, he was not attractive, he was poor. I mean, just why would anyone want to be with him? But people flocked to him. And they didn't know who he was, they just knew he had something. And he was something. And we can be that reproduction. To the point, if we'll go back to Isaac. If Isaac would, we're not talking about dying, but Isaac would move away. There could be different responses. Someone could say, I haven't seen Isaac lately. And Will could say, hey, that's because he moved away 2 years ago. It's like, not much impact there. Or Isaac could move away. And he said, I really miss Isaac. He made a really good meal and all these kind of things. And it's like, but they're missing you not because you're supplying them with Christ. Right? We just miss you because you're a nice guy. Or it could be, we're really missing something. Even a little bit undefinable. But just having Isaac present. And even for some, not present, there's still a supply. Because they're so constituted. They're praying in the realm of the body of Christ. They're still there. But if they would depart to be with the Lord, we don't have that anymore. And so it should make a difference. If you're here or not here, and it's like it doesn't make any difference, you should consider your ways, right? We should seek to be ones who are magnifying Christ by living Christ. So, who has Christ living in them? Okay. We need to make a commitment that others can see this. Not just because we tell them. Not just because, we wear a cross. Not, we could have tattoos saying, I love Jesus or something. If you want to do that, that's up to you. that doesn't mean you're living Christ, right? The real living Christ is expressing Christ to the point where it's like, that's Stephen, but there's just something else about him. I just love to be around him. And this is coming from me to Stephen. This is hypothetical. I hope we can get to that point sometime. Yeah. We should all have this aspiration that we would make a difference to others, make a difference to our community, make a difference to the church.